This is the first installation of Bethel Life Lab, and super excited. This is a venture of Bethel Church, and our goal with this is we want to offer a series of online connections and resources to help people deal with today's mental health challenges, and there are a lot of them. And we want to explore in these interactions, these video interactions, we want to explore the intersection of mental health and community life and relationships. And particularly then how that relates to our spiritual life, to spirituality. And tonight we're super excited to begin this, to kick this off with Pilar Gerasimo. I'll say just a couple of things about what I know of your background, Pilar, and how I got connected to you. And then if there's other things you want to add to that, please do so. Pilar was the founder and the editor for a number of years of Experience Life magazine, a great health, I would say more of like a health than a health and fitness magazine from Lifetime Fitness, and just had a lot of, and still does have a lot of really interesting perspectives on just living healthy lives. And then is also a podcaster of The Living Experiment, and is also an author. And that's how I heard of Pilar, was through her book, The Healthy Deviant. And you were interviewed in, oh shoot, I forget the name of it, but a community, Optimize Me. And that's how I heard you being interviewed, and just love your book and have read it a couple times now. And I'm super excited for us to be able to chat. Anything else you want to say about your background before we jump into things, Pilar?
No, I think that's it. Some people also followed my work when I went to Huffington Post briefly, and I was the top editor for the Healthy Living vertical, working with Ariana Huffington for just a brief moment. We can talk about that part of my story. But yeah, I kind of moved between spaces, but always focused on the same thing, which is whole person, whole life, healthy living, and what it means to be a healthy person, particularly in an unhealthy world, which is what my book is about.
Yeah, great. Well, I didn't know the Huffington Post connection. I saw that she'd given you a recommendation, and that's really cool. That's very cool.
Thank
All right,
you.
so before we get to your backstory, then let's start by talking about the Healthy Deviant book. And the people at my church, and when I give presentations, I talk about it a lot. And so I just want to again express that I appreciate the work that you've done. So can you first just give us, for the people who haven't heard me rant about it, could you tell us what the overview of the book is, and kind of what your operating thesis is in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book, I first always like to point out, mine's covered with Post-it notes because I do interviews on different things all the time, but it's an illustrated book. And that's unusual in the health and fitness realm. So I kind of hand illustrated all these charts and, little icons and things, but I also really thoughtfully decided to tell part of the story in pictures, because in my view, a lot of what has been problematic for health seekers in the health and fitness media realm has just an abundance of unrealistic photography, stock photography and high fashion photography and celebrity photography and before and after photography. And I just wanted nothing to do with that. I didn't want the book to be directed at anybody other than real normal human beings, so-called normal, those of us who are wandering around trying to make sense of the world we're living in. So the book itself is really the culmination of the 25 years that I spent doing health journalism, and really the entire life that I spent trying to figure out how to keep myself and get myself healthy in a world that seemed to be constantly working against me. I think when I started Experience Life magazine, I was very passionate about making sure that we told the truth about healthy living. And we did a ton of research into whole food nutrition and healthy movement. And we covered sleep, we covered stress management, we covered even social connections and supports as being important aspects, environmental health and dealing with the toxins and stressors in our society. But there was always a piece for me that I felt like I wasn't quite breaking through and telling the full truth about as I was discovering it. And the more I discovered it, the more I felt I needed to go deeper. And there really wasn't a way to cover the breadth of everything I wanted to cover in a magazine article. Although I'm very grateful, Experience Life did a piece, a feature-length piece. They let me write a feature-length piece before the book came out by a couple of years. And that was a fun way to workshop it. It got a lot of really great reception. That gave me confidence that the book was going to be well received. The thesis of the book, I would say, is that the most significant barriers that most of us are facing in becoming healthier, happier people are not a product of our failings as individuals, our lack of willpower, our lack of even knowing, the right diet or the right exercise routine. The biggest barriers are really embedded in our society, and the way that we have been programmed and conditioned to live and to think of as being a normal way of living is absolutely unprecedented historically. Human beings have never lived anything like the lives we're living, have never attempted to try to maintain or improve their health in the context of this many barriers. And we can talk about the debatability about that. I talk about it a great deal in my book, because a lot of times I think people don't really believe that. They think, well, certainly my great-grandparents had it harder. In some respects, they have, fiscally going through the Depression or World War or something. But the level of alienation, overstimulation, the preponderance of processed foods and sedentary pastimes, the intense social comparisons that we're up against, and the environmental changes, the technological changes, especially the technological changes, are unprecedented. So my book is really meant to be a guidebook to anybody that wants to break out of the mold that we've been stuck in, mostly for worse, and also who wants to beat the statistics in our society. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. So I both try to reframe the problem so people can see that more clearly. I call it the misunderstood problem. And then I reframe the solution, which I call a renegade solution, effectively arguing it's not really first or foremost even about diet and exercise. It's about your mindset and your perceptions and questioning the way that you've been led to live. The second part of the book is called The Healthy Deviant Hero, is called The Making of a Healthy Deviant. And it's about the Healthy Deviant Hero's journey that I went on personally. I describe it as my story and yours, because most people find that they've followed a similar trajectory of coming into the world as a pretty healthy, happy person, downsliding or going into compliance and dissent, getting kind of a rock bottom place, and then deciding that they need and want to change their lives in healthier directions. And sometimes that's a spiritual turnaround or a reawakening. Sometimes it's coming out through the darkness of addiction and depression. But once people begin that journey, which I call divergence, they then typically find their way to something I call rebellion, and then ultimately to a more sustainable place I call healthy deviance, at which point they kind of begin the return process back to being their natural self, but bring with them a lot of gifts and help for other people. So once I've described that journey, the third part of the book is really about the practices and the perspectives that are required to shift. I talk about 3 specific renegade rituals that I'm a big fan of, and that really help to re-regulate the systems in our body that are so dysregulated. And then the fourth part of the book is a program, a 14-day Healthy Deviant adventure, which is a really fun 14-day program where you start practicing this stuff and noticing what comes up. That's a big part of it, what the barriers are. And then the final part, part 5, is called Taking It to the Streets. And that's really about how this is becoming a social movement, a necessary movement for our survival and thriving. And addressing some of the social barriers to creating a healthy society and how we can change that. So bigger picture, bigger purpose. And I think to some extent, that's really the part that becomes a more spiritual conundrum, is while we're working on taking care of ourselves as individuals, how can we also see the broader responsibilities we have societally and to each other in the great community to make it an easier place for everybody to be healthier and happier, and ultimately, ideally, to achieve more like an optimal level of health, as opposed to just like avoiding the worst disease states that are publicized every day on the news.
Right. Just to connect this to church life, I was just at a conference on ketogenic eating, and one of the things I appreciate about your approach is you're not wading into the diet wars, and I don't want to get into any of that. But I was struck by, I was talking to another, actually a Christian person coming out of church life, and we were both talking about how these issues of physical health are almost uncomfortable to be talking about in churches,
Mm.
because a lot of us are not happy with our bodies. A lot of us feel like, for a pastor, for many of us pastors to get up and talk about being physically healthy would feel like, you're not being honest because you're struggling with it yourself. You're being hypocrisy, you
Yeah.
know. And so it just feels like it's this area of physical health is almost like, we don't want to go there in
Yeah.
churches because so many of us are struggling.
I totally understand that. And I think, the feelings of shame that we carry around about not being healthier physically, because it feels like it's more immediately obvious to people, but also, psycho-emotionally and mentally healthy and spiritually healthy. No one really wants to talk too much. I mean, it's changing now. Now on Instagram, it's sort of trendy to talk about all your chronic challenges and all the directions. It helps you be more relatable, I guess. But the truth is, yeah, when you're in a position, whether it's at work or with your family or with your place of worship, no one wants to be seen as failing really at anything or not being a role model in the ways, particularly that they're, encouraging other people to follow. The truth, though, is I guess this is one of my perspectives. First, I want to acknowledge that the religious centers of life, places of worship, communities that are religiously and spiritually based are actually very commonly now the home of efforts to create better health. And there's a lot of spiritual arguments for that. I'm thinking in particular of like Rick Warren and the Daniel Plan, which is, more than a decade old now. It was a really aggressive attempt at intervening at what they saw as an increasingly unhealthy population within their own community. The challenge, I think, with a lot of these programs, as well-intended as they are, is that they keep driving this message that you individually are responsible and for improving your health in these very specific ways, typically having to do with weight and knowing your numbers and things. And it kind of transactionalizes this idea of like, if you are a good person, you will do these diet and exercise things and somehow bring yourself up to snuff, and hopefully, for the glory of God and your larger, spiritual mission, you'll show up with more of what is potentially yours to give. And I agree with that last part. Like, certainly, as we improve our physical health, our mental health improves. We're going to talk more about that in a moment, at the intersection of physical and mental health. But ultimately, your vitality, your resilience, your capacity, your patience with other people, your lack of you're less reactive when you're healthy. I mean, literally, your inflammation goes down and your system becomes less reactive. You show up as a better version of yourself when you are physically healthy. But I think oftentimes we fail to see that our physical health suffering is a symptom of our spiritual, social, and mental and environmental health suffering. And by environmental in this case, I don't just mean the climate and ecology. I mean the environments in which we live and by which we are influenced. Churches being one of many, and the social environments that we put ourselves into in our spiritual lives, picnics and socials and things, where a lot of unhealthy food gets served, of course, and a lot of the pastimes do involve sitting and reading or talking. But again, I really think in my book, I attempt to reframe that problem, as I said, and help people realize that the real reason that we're struggling, even when we're well-intended, to get into an ideal, as it's presented to us form is, well, first of all, most of the ideals are not very realistic to begin with. But second of all, we are living in a world of unprecedented circumstances. And literally, we are the first generation in the history of humanity to be living this way. So most of the systems in our body are designed to thrive in a hunter-gatherer existence, in a nomadic sort of tribal existence, so subsistence existence, where we're really just focused on getting enough to eat and enough to be able to survive, which is a full-time occupation. But it's also a lot more time for us to connect as people in those environments. We had much more supportive communities. We weren't competing against each other or trying to live up to these unrealistic expectations. We celebrated each other's victories. We were there for each other by necessity, really, self-preservation, if nothing else, for support. So you take, the DNA and the metabolism and the nervous system formed over 2.5 million years, toss it into the culture that we're living in now, which is changing so rapidly, particularly now with AI. It's completely unpredictable what the next 5 to 10 years is going to look like. And then we say, figure it out, go on a diet, follow this exercise plan, live up to expectations. And it just is crushing to people when they can't manage to do that. They assume there's something wrong with them. And I really think our health problems are a symptom of a sick culture. So I go into some detail making the case for that statistically and scientifically, but that's really what I see going on. And so I want to just, especially to you personally, I think it's really important for us all to acknowledge that, first of all, a lot of people who look like they're healthy and fit are actually suffering on various levels. They may have all kinds of inflammatory disorders you don't necessarily see. They may be covering a lot of those up. They may be physically healthy, but mentally and emotionally in a lot of pain, and not actually having very healthy habits. I think I know a lot of people that look healthy on the outside that do really crazy stuff to appear that way, particularly in public, but are really not walking their talk. So don't assume you're alone in your struggles, and don't be ashamed of that, because you are just a symptom. You're a product of a culture that we're all dealing with.
Yeah. So you say, and I just want to give you a chance to throw these statistics out, checking the background of, physical illnesses, how much people are medications they're taking. What are those statistics about how many people are healthy and happy here in the United States today?
It's kind of terrifying. The reason initially that I began illustrating the book was to show in chart format what that looks like, because I think until you see it visually, it's a little bit hard to get your head around. I mentioned I was a health journalist for many years, and I kind of kept a running list of the statistics that were, flowing across my desk each year, which ones were getting worse, the new ones that were kind of stunning. And there were dozens and dozens of these statistics that were telling the same story. But when I put them on paper, I started with a statistic of just like, what is normal, what most people are. Well, at the time of my book writing, 50% or more of US adults were diagnosed with at least one chronic illness. And a great many have not been diagnosed, but still have illnesses. A lot of people have more than one. Because typically, if you have metabolic syndrome, you end up with type 2 diabetes and heart disease and all kinds of other problems. But then, 70%, again, all of these numbers have gotten worse since I wrote the book, but 68% overweight or obese, those numbers went up to more like 73, 70% of people taking at least one prescription drug on a daily basis. So you're getting to see the filled in characters, growing, and the not one, the light ones being disappearing. 80% of people not mentally and emotionally thriving. And here's the number that kind of flips me out. 97.3% as of last count of US adults were not practicing even 4 basic healthy behaviors. And those, as they considered them to be like relatively decent nutrition, kind of along the, food pyramid guidelines, which are not my favorite, but getting a reasonable amount of exercise, like 30 minutes, 5 days a week, not smoking, and then maintaining a healthy body composition. I always like to point out, I really think that maintaining a healthy composition of your body is not a habit, it's the product of your way of living. Mm-hmm. But if you looked at just those 4 factors, 97.3% of people were not doing them. And this number has not been updated since 2016 that I could find. 2016, the number was 97.3. I think everyone agrees health has gotten worse since then, but we're already in a single digit percentage of the population doing those 4 things. And they did not count 3 enormously important factors. Having decent sleep, which is as important, if not more important, even than not smoking. Not having social connections that are supportive around you, and managing your stress by whatever means, including potentially social connections. But those are 3 huge factors that didn't even get considered in that number. So I asked the question at the beginning of the book, like, how many people are doing all of that stuff that you'd need to do to stay healthy and happy for the long haul? And my educated guess would be, it would be, less than 1% probably. So literally, when I say healthy deviant, what I'm talking about is being deviating from that norm, because if that is normal, I don't think most of us want to be in the majority of that normalcy. It's not working. And that's why our culture is breaking down, and why we have so much strife and so much chronic complex trauma and so much inequality. And I could go on. But to me, it's both the symptom of a world out of balance, and also it is contributing to a world out of balance, because none of our institutions were ever designed to handle 97 or more percent of the population either currently being chronically ill or at risk of very soon becoming chronically ill. Like, you just can't run a society that way. There's not enough healthy people to take care of the people who are struggling.
Yeah. So can you go back to that again? Because mental health disorders, being on medication for one mental health disorder or another, did you mention those those are included in those statistics? So that is overlaid with everything else. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The number that I used in the chart, which when my book came out in 2020 was the most current number, was 80% of US adults not mentally or emotionally thriving. So what they did
That's
is
where it comes.
they took factors like depression, anxiety, all kinds of, social anxiety disorders, behavior problems, mental, cognitive function problems, things like that. So at 80%, that's pretty bad, but the number climbed during the pandemic, according to the CDC, these are all CDC numbers, to 89% of the US adult population. And we also saw non-adults, children and adolescents suffering in record numbers, and the suicide rates just absolutely skyrocketing, mostly because of social isolation and additional stresses, I think, put on already stressed systems. Just kind of got us to our breaking point.
Yeah. Okay. On the one hand, a person could have tuned in thus far and go, that's depressing or that's scary. But I like to point out that the problem is, like, when it comes to the solutions, they're probably not going to be rocket science. And we probably know what they are. But the problem is we don't do them. And we don't do them if we're not convinced that the problem is serious enough. And so that's what I appreciate about your work, is to say, this is not working and we have to make some changes. So
well, in the book, as I mentioned, I really want to, I think there's an American tendency that's not really working for us, to want to always jump to the solution. Just tell me what to do. Tell me the diet to follow. Give me the exercise routine. But how many times?
Steps.
Yeah, the listicle. Everyone loves listicles. But we've been, for a long time, we've been getting told things that are really hard to follow, like to make sense of. Follow a balanced diet, like eat a balanced diet. But we don't really even quite know what that is. We're supposed to be active. We kind of know what that would look like. But we don't really we don't get taught the skills required to do those things, like how to shop and cook for healthy food, how to do that in the face of an incredibly overscheduled life. And I just think we have to begin acknowledging most people they are not eating whole foods, not because they don't know that would be good for them, but because they don't know how to find it and make it and have it taste good in the time and with the money they have available in the context of their current lives. Other things have been made easier and more accessible, and potentially in the short term seem more affordable. So people understandably go to those automatic choices. The thing is that if we keep just telling people what to do and they keep not being able to do it, I personally think that's like an abusive thing to do to other people and to ourselves. And this is where my own personal story kind of came into play, because I was trying to do all of those things. I knew the right things to do. I was a health journalist, writing and editing a healthy living magazine, 10 times a year, hundreds of articles that I was researching and writing and editing. I knew everything I needed to know in principle, but I was suffering because I could not pull it off. Even I, with all the privileges and advantages that I had, could not make it work. So what happened to me one day in the fit of frustration, it was with my whole life, with myself. I was down on myself. I was frustrated with my schedule. I had healthy things I wanted to do, but couldn't fit in. I had work I needed to do, but was never going to get done. I didn't like the way I looked. I just felt like I was ashamed of everything that was wrong with my life. And I, just a kind of hissy fit, I guess, I stomped my foot on the floor of my house, which was a wood floor. And I did it so hard, I broke my foot. And that was a really, I mean, literally a breakthrough experience for me because it was painful. But I recognized like I had been breaking myself by attempting to do the almost impossible. At the time, for me, it was impossible. So I think what I want to drive home about this is that until you understand the problem, the real problem, the misunderstood problem, you're going to keep trying to solve the wrong problem, which is me and my willpower and not the right diet, not the right exercise routine. I just got to stop having Netflix and beer and cheese curls and instead do something much better. But there's a reason you're not doing that. There's several reasons you're not doing that. So in the book, I describe it in terms of the problem I describe as a vicious circle. And then I present the virtuous circle, which is my recommended way out. And we can talk more about that, but it's a radically different approach. It does not start with diet and exercise. In fact, it assumes you will find your way to the right diet and exercise for you. I give you an idea of the direction to move because there's really good science behind that. But it's also very biologically individual, and it's very different in terms of your life stage. It can be different in terms of your cultural environment. It can be, the resources that you have available. So it's depressing only if you just, to me, it's depressing to keep doing the same thing and have it not work. That's what leads to learned helplessness. I was delighted when I figured out how this could work. It was like, now I know the real problem. Yay. Now I know what to do. I completely reversed the order of the hierarchies of things that I thought I had to do. And just the most basic example of that was like, I massively elevated re-regulating my own nervous system so that I could have enough awareness to pay attention to what was triggering me to do unhealthy or healthy things, and then continually adjust in the direction of what was working for me, rather than just being kind of mind numbed by the culture I was living in and feeling like I was losing all the time, and focusing mostly on diet and exercise, which for me initially were very difficult to pull off and are now much, they're delightful. I mean, I would not want to live a life without them.
Okay. Well, let's do this. Let's put a pause on the specific sort of, because I do want to really drill down into what is wrong with how we're doing it, and then what should we do instead.
Yeah.
Can we talk just for a minute about that, that the intersection of mental health and physical health?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
because again, physical health is, as I was saying, is really important in our churches and to a lot of people in our communities, and it's challenging, but it's also, there's a lot of mental health stuff. I'll just let you talk about, they affect each other both ways, right? Mental health impacts physical health impacts mental health. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the simplest way that I can describe it is to say your level of physical health, what's going on in your gut, for example, how healthy, how you metabolize things, the level of toxicity you have in your tissues in your body, your circulation, your breathing, the nutrition that you're getting from the raw materials of your tissue. All of those things include and affect the health of how your brain functions. Inflammatory ways of living don't just affect you from the neck down. And they now know, for example, one really interesting thing is about 80%, sometimes they say 90% of the serotonin, the neurotransmitters and serotonin, is actually manufactured in your gut and then goes to your brain. So when we have a serotonin deficiency, it's not often a mystery. In many cases, they now know that that is a lot to do with what's going on, what we're eating and how we're living that's affecting our microbiome and our gut health. Leaky gut, for example, causes a cascade of inflammatory effects throughout the body. And those have very, very strong effects on the brain, to the point that they can really kind of incapacitate people. Too much toxicity, too many bad bugs. The stuff crosses the blood-brain barrier and really affects brain function. Similarly, glymph is a kind of a new scientific discovery. We know about lymph nodes. The lymph nodes are part of your detoxification system in your body, but there's a corollary system called glymph, beginning with a G, that is about how your brain detoxifies itself. And so if the system becomes, too polluted, undernourished, overstressed, overinflamed, absolutely your physical health affects your mental health. But it's also true that your level of mental health, your mood, your level of stress, your ability to think clearly, your belief systems, those things contribute to physical states, including cravings, reactivity, things that lead you to make unhealthy choices to try to numb your pain, drinking too much, eating too much, gambling, sex addiction, media addiction, all of that stuff can clearly affect your physical health really badly too. We just don't even think it's worth taking care of ourselves. Depressed people and chronically ill people who often become depressed are kind of famous for being like, I just can't seem to do the things I need to do to take care of myself, right? How many people know, like at the end of a really stressful day, you have much more cravings than you would under, a happier, easier going circumstance. So the multi-directional nature of this is very well proven out by science. Anybody who doubts this, you can look at it this way. If you've ever been really embarrassed, like suddenly you discover, you've got toilet paper attached to your shoe and you just walk down the aisle, or, someone says something, calls you out, or tells you something in your teeth. One of the most common reactions to being embarrassed is to blush. Or maybe somebody gives you a really nice compliment and you blush. But that is a physical reaction, blood rushing to your face, a change in the system of circulation that has been moving matter through your body as a result of a psycho-emotional state. So there's no doubting that. But unfortunately, we've really, for many, many years, we had it hammered home to us in this culture that physical health is the real health and mental health is some sort of like woo-woo fantasy soft thing, which is just nuts. It's absolutely crazy. And I'm so glad that in my lifetime, we've made that turn. But again, that is not the way that health was regarded during the vast majority of human history. Most traditional cultures, their healing knowledge base unequivocally assumes that physical and mental health are in together, the same thing, really. I always refer to the body-mind rather than the mind-body connection. I think we have a body-mind. We have a mind-body. It's one thing. And it just has always been connected. And we somehow got talked out of knowing that for a good part of 150 to 200 years here.
Yeah. Well, I sent you this this guy's name. What are your thoughts about Chris Palmer and his idea or connection between mental health disorders and metabolic disorders? Are you familiar with his work, and do you agree with that, or do you have questions about it? Or
I don't disagree with the premise at all. I'm not super familiar with Chris Palmer's body of work or his other philosophies, so I won't speak to those. But the idea that mental health is a function of metabolic health, I think I can't argue with that. And metabolic diseases, it isn't only that. I mean, metabolism, again, is not separate from everything else. It's connected to digestion and to nutrition and to detoxification. So every single system in the body, again, we've been trained to think of it as all separate. We've done this with nutrition too. There's zinc, and then there's vitamin C, and then there's probiotics, and we try to keep track of all this, and our brains just blow up. But yeah, metabolism, is a process by which the body turns stuff into other stuff, food into energy, and the Krebs cycle of metabolism functions. That's what keeps us alive. It's like our life force, basically. So things like mitochondria, the energy production factories in our body, when they aren't doing well, we have no energy. We have no get up and go. We don't feel well. And again, I can't imagine anybody making an argument against that, really. To me, it seems obvious. But the challenge again is like we do tend to want to think about it as one person will say, all health starts in the gut and it's all about the microbiome. And then somebody will say, no, actually, it's about protein and you need protein in the system to make this. And then someone else will say, no, it's all metabolism. Also, by the way, same thing with cancer. They can see now that there's a metabolic underpinning to cancer that we just haven't really acknowledged or paid attention to before. We had we don't know why causes it, So I think I would say that I agree with the premise that mental health and metabolism are hugely connected. This is also one of the reasons why they're finding, that exercise as a prescription works as well or better than most of the prescription medications for depression for most people. I don't want to make the overgeneralization. And again, emphasize that I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a health journalist, so I'm aggregating the science done by other people. That's really my profession and my interest. But there's no question, exercise is one of the most effective forms of antidepressant, and that has a lot to do with the metabolic effects of exercise.
Yeah. Well, I could, go into the weeds on this stuff with you, but I don't want to. I want to be sure we stay on task. So how about this? Let's go back then to that question.
Oh, can I say one more thing about that, Mark?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
One of the challenges that many times we have with, choosing a way forward with our health improvement is something I call another thing and another thing itis. That, we kind of move from one theory to one diet to the next task, the next product, the subscription program, the app, the device, and we just make it more complicated than it really needs to be. One of the cool things that I learned that I couldn't believe wasn't more broadly emphasized over the 25 years I was studying this stuff is that what is good for one system in the body tends to be good for all the systems in the body. So while you're working on metabolism, you're going to be working on nutrition and activity at appropriate levels. You're going to be thinking about, a diversity of nutrients coming in and a different Bowman talks about movements that are good for your body, running, but like how to be in your body, sending your body the right messages. It's not different for brain health. Eat a food diet that agrees with your personal system. For some people, that's going to mean like
Well, looks like she's getting cut off. Okay, those of you who are still on here, it looks like we just lost Pilar. I'm gonna I think I can pause the recording.
Have to be whipsawed between all these different approaches. Find a whole food diet, not a diet, a whole food way of eating that works for you. Learn the skills that you need to maintain it on the budget that you have, and then move your body in as many ways as feels good to you. And, then the list goes on. Get enough sleep, manage your health, but it's all one thing. If you do those things, you really don't have to worry about all of the micro optimization things until you've got the big rocks in place. And that to me is just like, get your priorities in order. And this gets into why I think the healthy deviant priorities are different than the priorities that most have been educated to follow.
So let's do that. Let's transition to that then. And again, this is at the risk of seeming like, okay, here's the 5 things to do now, but but maybe they're like it's a broader look at how we approach our well-being. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah. I think it's how would I put that? It's a broader look, but it's also just a little bit more probing. I think it's both like, let's look into what comes before the stuff that's making us all nuts, like uncontrollable cravings, the tendency to want to eat something that we know is not good for us rather than eat something that is healthy and, going to make us feel better. How does that happen? And can we just not pretend that that's not a factor? Because I think a lot of the nutritional advice that we get, the best advice we've heard over and over again from most people, something approximating a Mediterranean diet works better than other things, or as well or better. But most people are not doing that. So I got really interested in solving the problem of how can I make it so that I want to do these things and I'm not the victim of my own unconscious or unhealthy mindsets that have me doing things that are absolutely not in my own best interest, not consistent with my values, not consistent with my own priorities. How can I get myself into integrity, even though this world I'm living in is fracturing me at every turn? That to me is an interesting problem. So resolving that problem for me meant I had to put my diet and exercise priorities a little bit further behind and move up to the very front of the queue. How do I stay aware and in charge of myself more often? How can I begin to notice more clearly when I start falling off that set of rails? Because that's when I'm vulnerable. How do I become vulnerable? How do I become unconscious? I became a really close student of my own behavior and other people's behavior. And then I did a bunch of research in psychology and behavior change. And ultimately, what it came down to was when you are depleted, exhausted, overwhelmed, burned out, distracted, befuddled, you become incredibly vulnerable to temptations, to suggestions, and you become less and less capable of conducting yourself with conscious choices. You just simply don't have you don't have the software on board anymore. It's like you kind of shut down, and this other part of you, this reactive, hungry, crazy person comes out of hiding and begins doing things that are not really in your best interest. So for me, the suggestions that I make in the book are focusing on building competencies and skills in these areas there's three nonconformist competency areas I think are really important. One is amplified awareness. And I offer some ways of becoming more aware, more amplified in your awareness. But it really just means if you can become even a little bit more aware than most people are most of the time, you're going to find yourself confronting the need to change some things that you're doing that most people are still doing. You're going to be like, I don't think I want to do that anymore. And like, for example, when people drink too much, their inhibition goes down and their kind of impulsivity comes up. But that's also true of being stressed out and underslept. When you're underslept, if you have missed a decent night's sleep, you can be operating like you are basically drunk while you are trying to walk around, do your job, drive, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And also while you're trying to eat and exercise. So that's the first nonconformist competency. I have strategies for learning that. The second nonconformist competency is preemptive repair. And that's the idea that you need to start getting ahead of the damage that's done to you by virtue of living in this culture. Because as you become more damaged, you become more reactive, less conscious, and you really become more of a sitting duck for the automatic suggestions, the easy, accessible, automatic choices, what I call the unhealthy default reality. All the defaults are unhealthy. If you go with the default, you're going to be unhealthy. But choosing the not default, choosing the alternate, the one you got to go after, that takes energy, right? That takes focus and vitality most of us are lacking. So the preemptive repair idea is get ahead of the damage, meaning eating some healthy food before you're ravenous and likely to go for the unhealthy food, drinking water and other beverages that are hydrating before you get thirsty and dehydrated and suddenly your brain isn't working and you have a headache. All of those things are real effects of dehydration, and most people are chronically dehydrated a lot of the time. It's, having sleep before you're exhausted. It's taking small breaks throughout the day so that you don't just come home on your last fume and crash, get into a huge argument with your partner or your kids, or just end up a vegetable on the couch eating snacks out of a bag and not knowing why you're doing that. Yeah. And that brings us to the third nonconformist competency, which is continuous growth and learning, which I think, Mark, this is what you're doing by gathering this group of people together, is saying, it's in our own best interest to be learning new skills that help us survive in this unprecedented era. And they're not skills that you can learn all at once. They're not perspectives you can onboard all at once. You really need to be consistently seeking it out and letting it soak in, processing it, and then using it, practicing it, and then finding out what you need to learn next. So those are the competencies. And then how do you learn that stuff, right? I took the most powerful three interventions that I found worked consistently for me, regardless of what else was going on in my life, and shared them as a means of both re-regulating a dysregulated nervous system, which includes every other system, like metabolism, digestion, you name it. Re-regulating the nervous system, and at the same time, building capacity in these three areas of nonconformist competency. So you build the skills by doing the practices. The practices also help to re-regulate you so that you can then make healthier choices in whatever category you want to. Again, I do tell people what you need to know about moving, eating, and all that stuff. It's just like these are the tendencies that healthy deviant people have, and that's nice to know.
Yeah.
But I could give you a million diets to follow. Most people can't follow one for 5 days. I mean, but honestly, by 2 days, people are usually crashed for this reason. They're dysregulated to begin with.
So those three, can you tell us what they are?
I sure can. The first one is called the morning minutes practice. And this is really nice for anybody who has a kind of a faith-focused life. I believe that this will be an appealing devotional style practice. What are the idea is that at a minimum of 3 minutes after moment you wake up, the first thing is do not allow yourself to get into any kind of digital device or media. No news, no social media. Do not look at your phone. If you can avoid waking up with your phone anywhere near you, that would be better. I have little print-outable signs that you can turn into tent guards and set them on your phone if you do have to sleep with your phone, so that you can be reminded to do this practice first thing. Here's what the practice is. For the first 3 minutes that you are awake, allow yourself to come to waking gradually. Do not pop out of bed with a like blaring alarm. Do not flip on something device-like or look at something device-like. Let your nervous system wake up gradually. In that process, you're going to move from a delta brainwave state of sleep into a theta state, which is kind of between waking and sleeping. From theta, which is a really spectacularly important brainwave state, it only lasts a few minutes, typically at max, like 10 or 15 would be a long time. Usually it's within the first 5 minutes that are most critical. But in that theta brainwave state, when you're just coming to waking, a few things are really interesting about that state. One is that you're incredibly impressionable, suggestible. So the first things that you see are going to hit you harder and go deeper and be like more impactful. Well, if the first thing you see is terrible news from across the globe, or that, somebody likes or doesn't like something, or you're watching dog videos and you don't even know why you're watching them, it's crazy making. Your system doesn't really know what to do with that. It's already in reaction, and you've started a pro-inflammatory state, adrenaline, cortisol, and other things that are physical reactions to mental states, right? So in the first 3 minutes, if you can instead use those suggestible moments for yourself to set your intention for the day, to just notice how you're feeling, back to amplified awareness. How do I feel in my body? How do I choose to get out of bed? How do I choose to go forward from this coffee mug at this table? I like to spend the first 3 minutes of my morning typically lighting a beeswax candle. I have a cup of coffee that's kind of ready to go. And I just sit. I watch the candle. I look out the window. Sometimes I play my guitar. Sometimes I pet my dog. Sometimes I just listen to birds. I really try to encourage people to not be taking a ton of stuff in. You could read a devotional or something like that, something small and relatively digestible, but you don't want to make your brain work too hard, because the other thing that's really cool about this brainwave state is that it's often when we have our most creative ideas. It's often when we're most connected with our subconscious self, our own feelings, our dream state. We might remember things or come to answers or questions that we asked the night before. A lot of times I think of people who pray, oftentimes pray for answers or pray for guidance. And this is a very long human tradition of allowing yourself to go to sleep thinking on something, not obsessing, but like setting the intention that you want to resolve this. And then people wake up with the answer if they're accessible to it. But if you wake up and you flip on the news, or you wake up and you look at social media, you've just missed the answer train. It came and went in 3 minutes.
And people who encourage meditation would encourage meditation maybe right after you get up, but before looking at the news and that sort of stuff. Yeah. So meditation would be right up there as well. Yeah.
For sure. If you like meditation, here's the problem though. I think a lot of times we tell people what they should do, right? You should meditate. And there's a lot of guilt and a lot of angst that comes up when you're just like, I don't feel like doing that. So part of the 3-minute morning practice is that you get to do whatever you would like to do that day for the first 3 to 5 minutes. Anything that is low key and pleasant that allows your body to come to waking gradually is fair game. And it can be different on different days. So some days, initially I tell the story about like my sister had a yoga practice she was trying to do every day. And she ultimately went from 30-minute commitment to 3-minute commitment. And then she found that she often would end up doing the full 30 minutes. But if she didn't have to feel bad about it. What I found though is I did not want to do yoga every day. I'm just not wired up like that. Some days I meditate and do yoga, some days not. And I think that's a really nice freedom to give yourself so that two things happen. One, you'll do it more because you're not going to be like, oh, I don't want to try to meditate today. I think having a regular yoga meditation practice is fantastic. And eventually I encourage people to build one. But if it's been trying to do that, it's not working, try this instead. The other really cool thing about it is it's 3 minutes. And so when you don't do it, it's very interesting to ask yourself the question, what story am I telling myself that I don't have 3 minutes or that something else is more important than this? What you're telling yourself about the 3-minute practice is going to be the same thing you're telling yourself about the 30-minute exercise practice or whatever bigger thing you've taken on that you also feel like you're not doing very well. All the same barriers and obstacles are going to be at play. And a lot of those barriers are psychosocial barriers. They really are. Your perception that you have lack of willpower has everything to do with how depleted you are from living in the world you're living in, how distracted you are. So that's a cool thing to notice. That's practice number 1. And the second practice is called ultradian rhythm breaks. And just some fascinating science, a lot of it done by the military, but it's really science is on every kind of living organism you can imagine. Yeasts, plants, animals, every single part of our body is on a rhythm, like a circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle. Ultradian rhythms are like a mini circadian rhythms. They happen many times throughout the day. And it's as though you have a sort of a wave that goes like this. And when you wake up in the morning, you move into your first period of productivity, which lasts about 90 minutes. You get focus and productivity. So if you start work at 8 o'clock, about 9:30 or 10, you're going to find yourself, you're starting to come down into a fade, what they call a trough. And that trough is called an ultradian healing response. The idea is that you take a break from this high intensity productivity and focus to recover, to rebalance, to repair, to replenish a system that's been asked a lot of. And as your body gets repaired and rebalanced, then your energy comes back up again for another 90 minutes. And then it lasts for another 90 minutes. You need about a 20-minute break. This is absolutely objectively measurable in the human body, in every system, in the digestive system, heart rate, brain waves, everything affected by it. It's a lot like your heartbeat. You don't want it to stop. You want it to keep going like that. It squeezes and it expands. Your eyes blink in a rhythm, basically. And if you tried to keep your eyes open all the time, that wouldn't work either. But instead we fight that trough. When we start to feel fatigued, when we start to feel stressed or distracted, which are signals of depletion, of imbalance, of dysregulation, typically our thought goes something like this. Oh no, it's only 10 o'clock. I can't be tired now. I still have meetings to go to. Why is my energy flagging? I barely just started. I have to be here until 5. How am I going to get through the day? Why am I so hungry all of a sudden? So the signals that your body sends you to get you to take a break include things like hunger, bathroom urges, suddenly needing to go to the bathroom, which we then fight because we're too busy. I don't have time. Fidgeting, irritation, fatigue. For me, it's always like kind of tired eyes. I feel like my eyes get kind of like droopy and dry, and I just feel like I want to take a nap. It's very much the feeling you get when you're driving late at night and you just are exhausted and you're falling asleep at the wheel. It's like that, except you're at work or at home dealing with children or doing what you're doing. So again, back to amplified awareness. If you notice that this is your state, and instead of going, oh, this is terrible, I have to get a 5-hour energy drink or get some sugar or coffee, if instead you go, oh, this is my body asking for an opportunity to rebalance, replenish, repair. If you really hammer off, and there's different ways to take the break. You can meditate, lie down, you can take a little gentle walk around, you can go get water, eat a little something, you can have a social break, but you want your mind to be kind of running on more of like an empty space, like just daydream or don't do anything that requires focus. Definitely don't do social media or the web or anything in front of a computer. But if you take a break, you will be absolutely blown away at what happens. This is a form of preemptive repair. You allow your body to do micro repairs before by the end of the day, instead of getting high peaks, you're getting lower and lower peaks, and your troughs are getting lower too. So you've got diminishing returns throughout the day. You're just not performing well. And we all know this, like none of us do our best in the late afternoon after a long day of focusing. And that's why we get all inflamed and freaked out. And it's, believe me, it affects all kinds of systems. Blood sugar. They found diabetes is something, type 2 diabetics respond really well. Their blood sugar improves on an insulin response, improves on with ultradian rhythm breaks. It's really good for heart health. It's really good for hormonal health. It's really good for if you're trying to work on weight loss. Oh my gosh, the difference it makes in people's cravings is amazing. So it's again, much like the morning minutes practice, it doesn't have to be a huge big deal, but if people try to short sheet themselves, like I'll just take a 5-minute break, it's better than taking no break, but your body really can't do the full healing response that it needs in less than 20 minutes. So our culture is not set up for this again, though. This is why it's a healthy deviant behavior.
Yeah. So you're saying every 90 minutes, a 15, 20-minute break?
That's right. Yeah, which sounds crazy because we think we're supposed to go, go, go. And so that's the idea. The normal thing is to get up in the morning, go, 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 and then drop off to sleep. It does not work that way. Right. Everything in nature works like this, and we do too. Yeah. All right. Anyway, that's the two. The third one is a nighttime wind down practice, which is kind of like the morning minutes in reverse. It's a deceleration as you try to kind of, a sleep scientist I talked to recently called it landing the plane, that you just can't, you don't want to go straight down. You need to spend about a half hour at least winding down. And I call it a nighttime wind down because I think about bringing everything down. The pace of your energy and how fast you're going, the temperature, particularly in your bedroom, needs to be dropped. You want the lights to come down, the media to go off. So that deceleration prepares your body to sleep. And it's a really good time to do spiritually inclined activities or reflections, or to connect with your family and just, in low key ways. And then you'll find you go to sleep more easily and you'll sleep better, which is important for repair again.
Okay. We have used this analogy. We've said to people, pretend you're a smoker and you need a smoke break every now and then, but just don't smoke. Just like smokers would go outside, and instead of smoking, just go outside and just hang out.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people reflect on that, it seems like smokers get breaks and nobody else does. Well, that's because smokers take breaks.
That's right.
And it's interesting, but it's like, it's a form, smoking is a form of too late attempted repair. It doesn't really repair anything, but what it does, smoking relieves a feeling of psycho-emotional stress. And so when people need a smoke, what they're saying is, my system is dysregulated. I'm beginning to suffer. I'm going to go get a smoke so that I don't have to feel this way. But it doesn't get to the root cause of the problem, which is why you feel that way, is you're overstressed and dysregulated. So again, getting ahead of that problem is really what healthy deviance is about.
Yeah. Well, this is super helpful, and I see we're at our time. Is there anything else that you want to say that we didn't cover here?
No, I feel like we covered great ground, and I really appreciate your interest and your community's interest in this. I think one thing I would say is that if anybody is intrigued by these ideas or wants to explore them a little bit more, I have a free preview of the book that's available at my website, healthydeviant.com. And while you're there, you could also take the Are You a Healthy Deviant quiz, which is a free quiz, take 2 to 3 minutes typically. And it will kind of give you a score and tell you where you fall on the spectrum of healthy deviance, from decidedly non-deviant all the way to hardcore healthy deviant, and give you a better idea of what this really is about, which I think might be helpful to some folks. I do have all kinds of digital courses and a membership program. I'm on social media platforms. So if you're interested in diving more deeply into this world, I would welcome you to any of my communities on Facebook or within some of my, my courses and programs. But if nothing else, I just encourage everybody to think about, if normal is unhappy, unhealthy, and headed for a earlier than necessary death, and not showing up with your best gifts, maybe being not so normal would be a better choice for more of us. I think defining a new normal is what I'm after, and I really appreciate your interest in that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great discussion and some really, really helpful stuff. And I do encourage everyone to, if they haven't already, get your book. and check out some of your courses. And again, thank you for being here tonight. I was saying at the beginning, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat. Well, I haven't given anyone a chance, and there isn't, people haven't typed questions in the chat, so we're good.
That's
Thanks for
great.
being here, Pilar. And
You're so welcome.
yeah, and
You're welcome.
everyone who is here, thank you for being here. And you have a good night, Pilar, and everyone
Thank
else
you.
have a good night. And God bless you all. See ya.